Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and we are so happy to be back after a week of not being here live. So much fun to be back doing the show again today, and so happy to be doing it with you. What a weekend it was for Georgia. Obviously, it's the time of year we've come to expect a lot of recruiting stuff, so we're going to do a lot of that. But, man, what a fun story this Georgia baseball team has turned out to be. The thrilling run through the NCAA Regional, setting up a super regional this upcoming weekend against NC State. Georgia baseball is red hot right now, and I'm certainly enjoying that, and I get the impression that many of you are too. So we're going to talk about some of that on the program today, as you would imagine we would be. And, of course, Jon Stinchcomb stops by today on a Monday there as well. And this is an important conversation with Jon because we are post-athletic board. That kind of took place right as I was kind of going out of town. Kind of an important part of the summer calendar for Georgia. Jon's on the athletic board, so we'll get some recap from him of kind of where things sort of stand right now with UGA Athletics. We'll get a lot of that with Jon Stinchcomb coming up in a moment. His presence, obviously important, but your presence most important of all. So truly, deeply, sincerely, let me say thank you for being with us as we get rolling back here live again today. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
How much did you love Georgia baseball this weekend? Man, so much fun. Obviously, beating up on a hated rival like Georgia Tech was good last night, but there was more to the weekend than just that. So coming up in a few minutes here, we're going to do a good bit on Georgia baseball, bringing a lot of excitement to the campus and the community here with a run through an NCAA Regional, and now just 2 wins away from possibly going to the College World Series. We'll do a lot on that here coming up in just a few minutes. It was a great, great weekend for Georgia baseball. I want to begin, though, with another, I think, great sort of, series of events as it relates to Georgia recruiting. We had this time circled on the calendar for a very long time, knowing that Georgia was going to host really some massive names in terms of official visitors, kind of kicking off a busy summer. And the general cadence to this is you're going to host visitors all throughout the month of June, and then you kind of roll into, and we saw this a year ago, the after effect of all those official visits is a period of time in July where it's just going to tick off. Bang, 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 bang. Possible commits many days in a row. You got July 20th that's sort of circled as a day for multiple commits. Like the energy in July on the commitment front is going to be wild. And obviously the groundwork is laid for that by what goes on in weekends like just took place. And some of this is like rumor and innuendo, and some of this is like whispers, talking to people who know people who know people who know people. And, you kind of get the lay of the land in all of this. But the one thing that's not, any kind of mystery about, the one thing that's not any kind of like rumor, the one thing that's very much on the record is that Kirby Smart a few times here over the course of the offseason has laid out what his vision is for Georgia football. And, there's a saying out there that leaders are repeaters. And when you're repeating the same message over and over again, I think as a leader, you're demonstrating what you truly view to be important. And so I thought it was really interesting last week during the SEC spring meetings in Destin, Florida. Coaches, administrators are there on hand for that. When Kirby Smart was kind of asked about, putting rosters together and things like that, Kirby said something almost word for word similar to a clip you've already heard within the last few weeks here on DawgNation Daily, going back to when Smart was in Birmingham for that golf event, back in May, about kind of how Georgia wants to put its roster together, and the thing for Georgia that takes, sort of supreme importance over anything else. And given what Georgia just did from a recruiting standpoint here this weekend, Smart's reminder of this, going back to SEC spring meetings last week, repeating something he'd already said once, at least once, maybe more than that during this offseason, kind of an important way to kick off this week. So let's hear Kirby Smart from Destin, Florida, on how Georgia wants to put its rosters together.
We are fundamentally a high school development program. We want to sign high school players, develop high school players, and grow them as men and retain our roster. And I think when you look across the country, we've done as good a job of anybody of retaining our roster and not having to go wholesale into the portal, which is what I prefer to do when you talk about roster management. But we put a lot of time and effort into our roster, and that includes our PWOs and our kids that maybe are backups, because we think that their future says they're going to be starters. So we want to grow and develop our players from within and not have to go through the portal.
So 2 big points there, and it's stuff we've heard Kirby Smart say in the past, that this is going to be primarily a high school football recruiting machine for Georgia. The main apparatus for filling this roster is going to be high school football recruiting. Not to say that Georgia won't use the portal, but Georgia, as we've heard Kirby Smart say over and over again, is going to be primarily a team that looks to build through high school and then supplement with some portal stuff. But the transfer portal will never be sort of the main mechanism for how Georgia fills its roster. And the other word that you heard Kirby Smart use there, and once again, this is also kind of touching back on a familiar topic, is that the name of the game for Georgia is going to be retention. We said this, what was a couple of weeks ago, when you compare, like, say, Georgia and what it's getting right now to the hype that, like, Ohio State is getting. And the misnomer that's out there is that somehow Ohio State has had a better offseason than Georgia's had because Ohio State added this player to the portal and they added that player to the portal. And there's all this sort of like sexy headlines connected to Ohio State. But the point we made about Georgia is the quality of its offseason is kind of measured by the headlines you didn't read. You didn't read about so-and-so leaving the program. You didn't read about so-and-so being swayed away by some big NIL offer. There were kind of below the surface some transfer rumors, but they never materialized to anything tangible and real because Georgia is just really good right now, seemingly, at player retention because, as Kirby Smart explained once again there, we're explaining to guys that if you're a backup, even if you're a walk-on, if you're somebody well near the bottom of our roster, we believe you have the potential to be a future starter. And if you're a future starter, you have the potential to play in the NFL. And even if you don't ever make it to be kind of one of like the main starters, you can still go on to have an NFL career, as plenty of Georgia players have proven. So all of that is really, really interesting from Kirby Smart. But this is the part of this that also kind of gets a little bit complicated too, is that when you make a decision to say, we are primarily going to be a high school recruiting program, and that's our sort of main area of focus, the unspoken kind of like context that is there is a lot of effort involved in making that happen. It is not a sort of simple, easy process. There is a lot of like logistics that go into this. And I think one of the things that's interesting is we kind of have a tendency, because we're an entertainment-based show, to sort of focus in on the fun part of football. But there is a part of football that's very like logistical and kind of like, it's almost more like sort of NBA-style management than it is actual football X's and O's. And, when Kirby Smart first became a head coach, think about 2016, 2017, one of the things that he seemingly was using really well was the previous relationships he had had with recruits when he was an assistant coach. Because y'all know the NCAA rules. As an assistant, you just have more access to players than you do as a head coach. That a NCAA restriction on head coach in terms of how much they can actually interact with recruits. So in 2016, 2017, those early recruiting classes, even in the 2018 class to a certain extent, a lot of the guys that came into Georgia were guys that Smart had known really well and very personally when he was still an assistant coach who kind of had unfettered access to all these recruits. What's kind of amazing about Georgia in terms of the recruiting success they've enjoyed in recent years is like how much of that has been built on Kirby Smart no longer having the same personal relationship he once had, but developing the sort of, tentacles for his program, developing the operational expertise, the operational intelligence of the program. All of a sudden now, as a sort of a CEO-style head coach, the operation works the way that it's supposed to kind of build relationships on a grand scale, in a very scalable way, in a way that maybe Smart was doing individually when first got started. And I think if you look at all the stuff that you're going to see, online here, coming off this weekend, you're seeing the degree to which Georgia's having, the success with all this. I mean, I'll point out a few names in particular. Think about a guy like Lagonza Hayward. That's a defensive back. Maybe Georgia was a little slow and for whatever reason, in getting involved in this recruitment, now trying to make up ground pretty quickly. But when you have a visit weekend like the one that Georgia just had that goes as smoothly as these go, gives you a chance to sort of make up that ground pretty quick. Think about a guy like Zayden Walker, linebacker we've talked about before. This is a pretty contested recruitment here right now. And there are some programs who maybe can sell a sense of desperation of, oh, man, we need you so badly. That becomes really, really hard for Georgia to compete with. But once again, you get the impression that Georgia's doing really well in that regard. You'll see some video out there. No doubt we'll talk about this later on this week of a guy like Travis Smith, wide receiver. We know how badly, we've talked about this plenty, that Georgia wants to win this year with these in-state wide receivers. It certainly seemed like that based on some of the video stuff that you're seeing of Smith's visit, that Georgia rolled out the red carpet in a very successful way, for Smith here this week. I'll also point out a couple of other stories here, kind of in no certain order. One of the things I'm going to be looking to, especially as we get Jeff Sintel kind of back in on this, and I know Jeff's been away here a little bit, but as he kind of gets back in, one of the things I'm going to be really interested to see and hear is kind of how things went for a guy like Elias Williams. We kind of focus in on either who Georgia's trying to flip away from other commitments or kind of add into this class. But just the same way that Georgia wants to retain its roster of current players, it wants to retain its committed recruits too. Paying attention to what a guy like Elias Williams and his thought on this particular weekend, especially as Williams continues to be a rising star in this 2025 class, that's going to be a really big deal. There's going to be a lot of attention paid to guys like, the tandem of players currently committed to USC, including, Isaiah Gibson, the edge rusher, and Justice Terry, the defensive lineman, kind of hearing what they're all about. I think we've had a tendency to sort of group Gibson and Terry together here a little bit as of late because their stories are similar. They took visits to L.A. and then committed to USC. The truth is, though, as we kind of move a little deeper in on all of this, I almost think we probably need to break these two stories up and sort of treat them as separately because it seems like there's a lot more kind of statements being made by the Gibson camp about how they feel about Georgia. Sometimes it feels like it's a little quiet right now around Terry, maybe not quite as open about some of that here at the moment. But nonetheless, these are some of the big stories we're kind of following coming off a weekend that was there for Georgia. And I guess to sort of sum all this up, the bottom line for me is that one of the adages you hear a lot when it comes to recruiting is, well, of course, official visits always go well. You're hearing, so-and-so had a good official visit. So-and-so had a good official visit. And the thing that you hear is, well, official visits always go well. The truth is to a certain extent, I guess that's probably somewhat true. But when you're trying to host so many official visitors, keeping everybody happy and keeping everything running smoothly is probably not quite as easy as Georgia always makes it look. As I said before, Kirby Smart during his time as head coach has kind of gone from being the sort of one-man recruiting show who had all these great personal relationships, all these elite recruits that allowed Georgia to build big classes in 2016, 2017, 2018, to all of a sudden now you're leading an organization with all kinds of people and you have to know how to direct them in the right way and make sure everybody's doing the right job to make weekends like this go as smoothly as they possibly can. And at Georgia, it seems like that's the case. But it doesn't always go that same way for everybody. Not everybody's big summer weekends go quite as smoothly as you want them to. And sometimes if you're not careful, if you're the wrong kind of program, you end up getting people sort of talking about the stuff that you maybe don't necessarily want them talking about. We saw an example of that at Florida where A.J. Hill, a lot of you know him, a really good quarterback prospect from down in Houston County, a player that I really like. I think Houston County is a really good program. Hill's been a really good player for a long time. He's also shown a lot of interest in Florida, and a photo from Hill's recent visit to Florida got some attention because some people weren't too happy with the hotel. If you're watching a video, you see this. The hotel there in Gainesville, Florida, where there appears to be some cracks and some sort of unsettling looking things on the ceiling there of the hotel. The wall kind of straight in A.J. Hill's point of view there does not appear to be well taken care of. This does not appear to be the nicest looking hotel room here at the moment. It appears that maybe somebody at Florida kind of dropped the ball in terms of getting the hotel room for a pretty important quarterback prospect like Hill. A little bit of a mess up there on the part of Florida. So the point is you hear all the time that, visits always go well. These weekends are always fun for the recruits. But if you don't have the right kind of sort of recruiting machine in place, maybe the ball gets dropped. Maybe your recruit doesn't have a good time, and maybe the wrong kind of photo kind of leaks out on social media. And then all of a sudden, people are having the wrong kind of conversation about your program. We've seen the team pictures of Florida before. they got 8,000 people wearing golf shirts in these team photos standing around the players. It's almost like they have more support staff than actual players and coaches. But if you don't know how to deploy those golf shirts effectively, if you don't know how to deploy that support staff effectively, you end up with photos like you just saw there of a pretty important recruit with a pretty ugly hotel room, and all of a sudden people are asking questions like, what's going on at Florida, and why can't Florida take care of recruits properly during a recruiting weekend? You don't see stories leaking out like that at a place like Georgia. You see Georgia managing all this really well, a gigantic number of official visitors, but the best that I can tell based on the online chatter, everybody having themselves a really good time. That speaks to the organizational intelligence that Georgia has. It is a recruiting machine. Georgia says, as Kirby Smart spoke about last week at spring meetings in Destin, Florida, we want high school recruiting to be the primary mechanism for how we put our roster together. It takes a lot of work to commit to that. But when you see Georgia coming off a recruiting weekend that was, you realize the hard work that's taking place. Georgia seems to be pretty good at that right now. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We're happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us. Video across all platforms, radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rep, podcast, wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, everything else. Let me give a shout out to the folks who are listening to us there on Spotify as well, because I love that as a podcast platform. I think it runs really smoothly. I would invite you, if you have not subscribed to the podcast before, whether it be Apple or Spotify, either way, just simply go and subscribe. The episodes will show up for you there. And maybe if you sometimes check us out a little bit on video, but you want the full show there on the podcast, that's a great way to get that. So let me encourage you to subscribe to us as a podcast if you haven't already. I'm always going to be a little bit of a podcast homer, to be honest with you, because it's the platform that we first started on. It's always been one that I've been incredibly proud of. We believe it or not, we actually sort of count now as a pretty old podcast, because when we first started, podcasts were, at least in terms of a major phenomenon, a relatively new thing. But we've been doing this for a long time now. So I'm thankful to everybody who's there on podcast. If you've never subscribed to the audio version of our show, we'd love to have you do that there. Spotify, Apple, anything else, just really glad to have you for all of that. Also, Pella Window and Door of Georgia. What a great thing it is to have them as a part of the program here today. Energy-efficient windows and doors. That's what they're all about. Hot weather means air conditioning units cranked up. That's expensive. You want to keep that cold air on the inside of your house where it's supposed to be. That's what the energy-efficient windows and doors of Pella Window and Door of Georgia are all about. Making your home feel good on the inside, making it look good on the outside. A lot of you kind of this time of year, there's a lot of real estate conversations taking place. This is that time when a lot of folks are thinking about moving or making sure your home looks as good, because perhaps you've got a new place you'd like to be and you want to kind of set yourself up for the best possible resale value. That's what Pella Window and Door of Georgia is all about there as well. So after hearing me speak about them for years, perhaps it's time for you to have that no-pressure consultation with one of those Pella experts for yourself there too. Stop by and see them in Duluth. You can do it in person with them. They can come by and visit you at your home and kind of see what your space looks like and how they can kind of provide a great value for you on all of that. You can also do it virtually if you would like doing that. And between now and the end of the month, you can get great savings there as well. Between now and June 30th, you can get 15% off your Pella project or some special financing options there too. So please, give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. Or online, pellaofga.com/DawgNation. That's pellaofga.com/DawgNation. We've got Jon Stinchcomb here coming up in a moment. Good conversation coming up with Jon. He is, of course, a distinguished member of the UGA Athletic Board. They're just coming off their meetings a few days ago, so we'll get a recap with Jon on some of that here coming up in a moment. But prior to that, I want to go around the doghouse. It's poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And I got to tell you, man, I just thought this weekend was so much fun. Georgia won kind of a series of thrilling baseball games to advance out of the NCAA Regional, setting itself up for Super Regional coming up against NC State. But from a baseball standpoint, I think the real takeaway here is kind of how, I don't want to say easy Georgia made it look, but when you compare, what oftentimes happens in these NCAA Regional games, Georgia never got knocked into the losers bracket. Last night against Tech, a game that Georgia ultimately wins in 10 innings, last night, Georgia's in a situation where obviously if you can win the game there and win the series there on Sunday night, you want to do that. But you don't want to do anything from a pitching standpoint that takes away your advantage on Monday, because when you host the regional, that's what you're trying to set yourself up for. You get to be the home team again on Monday. You want to make sure you got full pitching staff ready to go on Monday. So you don't want to give up anything on Sunday, even though you want to win the game, that puts you in harm's way to come back and win the regional there on Monday. That's the whole point of being the host side, the whole point of staying in the winner's bracket. You want to make sure you keep that advantage. And so that's the way that Georgia kind of played it there last night, and yet still found a way to win the game. This is a Georgia team that obviously has not been to a super regional in quite some time. And the last few times it's been in the regional, I hadn't even been in a regional since 2019, but the last few times, had a little bit of issue there. This is not a team that showed any problem, battled against Army, got the win, obviously took care of UNC Wilmington, and then, the thriller last night against Tech, when Tech was trying everything it could, sort of extended season. It's a pretty big statement by Georgia, and I don't mind telling you this. There are times this year where I've sort of wondered if Georgia was kind of punching above its weight class a little bit. They obviously have no problem scoring runs. This is not the same pitching staff that Wes Johnson will probably have in a couple of years. They do walk a lot of batters. Sometimes that keekeeps the other team in the game. So, at times this year I haven't been quite so sure what the postseason fortunes for Georgia could be. When you go 3-0 in the regional and march through it the way they did, that's a pretty big statement. And Georgia made that there last night. And obviously after the game, both in terms of the resilience that Georgia showed against Georgia Tech and the atmosphere created by Georgia fans, all of that was on Wes Johnson's mind. This is what the first-year coach said after Georgia won the NCAA Regional.
Remiss if I didn't talk about our fans. I'll rival what I saw tonight at Foley Field with any place in the SEC. I mean, it was loud. They were awesome. They were engaged. Moving on to the game real quick. I think it's important, as I tell our players all the time, you can't ever hit the panic button. It's a long game. It's the teams who can stay focused. It's the teams who can understand that they got to get us out 27 outs as well. Keep teams in games like this.
So I'm just telling you, I've liked the demeanor that Wes Johnson's brought to this team all year long. I've said this before, kind of being sort of an analytics-minded pitching guru. I wasn't kind of sure what kind of personality Johnson would have as a manager. We don't really call college coaches managers, but you get my point. What kind of personality would he have as a manager? I like what he's bringing to the table. It's easy to like a guy who's winning. I certainly understand that. But everything I've heard from Johnson this year, I think has been really fun. And y'all, the atmosphere for fans. My son had some baseball games this weekend. I wasn't able to attend in person. We were watching everything on TV. My gosh, obviously what they were doing over at Kudzu Hill. And last night you saw some Georgia football players up there on top of the indoor facility, like looking down in on Foley Field. The crowd was rocking. The team was responding. Man, this was so much fun. And it's the culmination of apparently what's been a little bit of a vision for the University of Georgia, even prior to Wes Johnson being hired, because one of the things that Johnson also said last night was it's the commitment that he kind of saw from the university that made a guy who had some options. This is a guy who's been in Major League Baseball, was obviously attached to an LSU program that's one of the best in college football in most years. He had some options and some choices of where to go. Why would he choose Georgia? Well, last night, Wes Johnson kind of talked about what he saw in place here at UGA prior to him taking the job.
I think the reason I want to thank them, the support we get from them, I mean, that was a big draw for me. Like their vision, like they were passionate about what they not only want to do, here for the university, but where they want athletics to go. And when you see that kind of passion and that drive to, get to a level that they want to be to, then yeah, you get excited. And so I think those things, like I say, it takes everybody. It's just not just me or, it takes our coaching staff. It takes our support staff, the grounds. It takes everybody if you're going to be successful. And, boy, it's hard to push the rock uphill both ways, so to speak. So I think it's important that those people are mentioned just because without them, I don't think we're here.
So I love what I saw from Georgia. This is a team that's played with a lot of heart and soul all year long. It continues now coming up in NCAA Regional. I guess the one final point I'd also make about this there as well, and if you're paying attention this weekend, perhaps you noticed this too. we kind of live in a professional sports state, right? We got the Braves. I'm a huge Braves fan. And I've always sort of felt like that because UGA exists so close to Atlanta, there's a lot of oxygen that's sort of sucked out of the room sometimes when it comes to non-football sports at Georgia in a way that, Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee, programs like that don't necessarily deal with because Atlanta's just such a big city and the sports landscape around here is pretty crowded. I don't know if those teams are always successful, but it's a pretty crowded sports landscape. And so perhaps sometimes maybe Georgia baseball hasn't always gotten the attention that it deserves. But if you're watching that this weekend, you're seeing how special the sport is. And I just think this is something that we all need to understand, appreciate, and this also needs to shape the conversations we're having going forward because we've got some big discussions taking place around college athletics right now. Y'all, people still really, really like college athletics. And there is something about, and perhaps we can put our finger on this, perhaps we can't. There is something about the college part of college baseball that's just really, really fun in a way that Major League Baseball can't match, and I love Major League Baseball and have for my entire life. So as we're talking about what the future of college athletics is supposed to be, let's keep weekends like this in mind, that something about college athletics is just really, really fun. And for Georgia and its Diamond Dawgs, a chance to be fun for a good bit longer here in the month of June. I'll also tell you this real quick. Last night after the game, our Cody Chaffins, who does a great job with us on DawgNation Daily every day, and Mike Griffith, they got together for a little bit of post-game reports. If you want more in-depth on everything that goes down there with Corey Collins and Phelps' home run and everything that Georgia did to advance in this NCAA Regional, they'll give you all of that on the DawgNation video channels. And our buddy Jay Black gave me this note before the show today. That was the 9th win this year athletically for Georgia against Georgia Tech, spanning all sports there. So a lot of fun there on that. And that is Around the Doghouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. Of course, we got a summer vibe going around here on DawgNation Daily here right now. And as you think about the summer, the brand new offering from Dr. Pepper is perfect for your summer enjoyment. I'm talking about the creamy coconut version of Dr. Pepper, Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut and Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut Zero Sugar. One of the things that Dr. Pepper's gotten really fun with as of late, kind of finding these new flavors and offering some cool new things in the market. People are certainly sitting up and taking notice, especially for this very, very summer-themed Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut and Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut Zero Sugar. It's delicious. I'm hearing great feedback about it from so many folks, and so it's your time to check all that out as you're at your local Kroger, wherever you're doing your grocery shopping. Enjoy yourself this summer some Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut and some Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut Zero Sugar. So that's the story. Big recruiting weekend for Georgia. Obviously, a fun weekend for the Diamond Dawgs there as well, and a lot on the horizon post-athletic board and SEC spring meetings. Let's touch on all that here right now with Jon Stinchcomb, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let me bring on Jon Stinchcomb and the great former Georgia All-American. A lot to talk to about with him for our first time to catch up with Jon here in a while. And Jon is, let me see if I can figure out where this is. Is that the Bahamas? Where you at, Jon?
It's the Bahamas of Georgia. I'm down here in Savannah. So,
oh, wow.
Here for the GIAA Coaches Clinic and going to offer up a little bit of knowledge maybe for a short period of time for all the coaches down here.
Well, I tell you, you have joined us obviously a couple times this summer in the midst of a pretty busy schedule for you, so I certainly appreciate that. I know that this is a very busy time for you, so the fact that you make time for us, I certainly very much appreciate.
Well, hey, dogs come first for always. So I'm always happy to talk about all the great things that are happening at the University of Georgia and obviously the athletic program. And this time of year, it's usually kind of slow, but it seems like every time we talk, there's something that we can discuss that is on the horizon or right here on our plate for Georgia that's pretty exciting.
Well, I don't know how much of the baseball you got to see this weekend. I know it's, like you said, you got a lot going on and the games weren't always super easy to find. But if you did get to see them, Jon, I thought it was great. I mean, this team's got a lot of heart and soul. I just think college baseball is a blast. Foley Field was rocking, Kudzu Hill, and all this, the folks in the regular grandstands there as well. I mean, it was just the best this sport has to offer. And I've said this a million times over the course of the last few years, because what you see is that college baseball is so much more popular as a sport, I'm talking about, than it was the last time Georgia was making a big run. You think about, playing Fresno State in a World Series final, things like that. The sport is just so much more popular now, and I've been so jealous in recent years of the success that other SEC teams have been enjoying, because it just looked like they were all having so much fun. Well, last night, and obviously this weekend, and really for the entirety of this season, Georgia fans themselves have been able to have some of the same kind of fun, and it's every bit as enjoyable as I assumed that it would be.
Yeah, and what's awesome is you get to see Georgia fans are just chomping at the bit. Just give us a reason, and then we will rally. I think you saw that. Stegman, I've never seen quite the energy like what I saw, especially early in the season this year and for basketball. And same holds true for baseball. You watch some of the clips. I mean, I wasn't there in person, but watched it last night. You watch the clips and you go, man, this place is rocking. I think even Wes mentioned it in his post-game commentary, that I think that Georgia really rallies. All they need is just the littlest of reasons to get out and support our teams. And Georgia certainly has offered up some exciting teams for us to cheer on in these past few years.
And I'll tell you this, I mean, I love Major League Baseball. And I love the Braves, and I have had so many happy moments watching. That's been my baseball team the entire life. But, I've never seen a player cry after a playoff win in Major League Baseball. There's just something about what's meaningful about college athletics. It just sort of seems to bring that out. I'm not trying to be corny or too sentimental or whatever else, but Corey Collins, who's been through a lot in his Georgia career last night, and, the emotion that he showed upon seeing in, this year, all that to come together to have this success, you don't get that in professional sports. And I just think, in addition to being happy about what Georgia is doing here in particular, the appreciation that when you put college as a descriptor in front of athletics, whatever the sport happens to be, there is just a different level of emotion that's brought into it. And I can understand and explain some of it. I think there's some of it that sort of defies explanation. But last night, to me, that was part of the story here or there as well, is that college sports are still really, really fun. And we're about to have a bunch of discussions about what's coming next for this thing we call college athletics. But whatever it's about to be, we need to make sure it still feels the way that it felt last night, because not just at Georgia, but all across these. I mean, I've been watching a lot of these regionals here. People still really, really like college athletics, and it brings out a level of emotion, whether it's Corey Collins or a bunch of other kids who are kind of in the same spot, young men in a similar spot. It just brings out a level of emotion that professional sports, and you played in the NFL, it just brings out a level of emotion that pro sports cannot provide.
Totally agree. And I think that's what makes college athletics so special, is those spikes of passion, right? Where you see teams and it just feels like it means more. The old SEC slogan for the past couple of years, SEC, it just means more. There's some validity to that. And you watch these players play and the emotion that they put in, and that's really why it creates such highs and lows. And this time of year, it can, that pressure almost can create some opportunities for mistakes, but it also creates opportunities for greatness. And you see how much it means to these guys. And, they're only, a lot of them, a couple years removed from high school ball and maybe just a few months removed from playing professionally. But for this small window of time, it's that cross section of the love for the game and the passion for sports and the emotion that comes in. And, it may not be refined at all times, but there's certainly a highly developed percentage of skill that factors in, and just you marry that with the passion that they play with. And I think that's what makes college athletics just in general so much fun, is there's variability and there's a love for the game that can be shared between the players and the fans.
Yeah, I promise we got to talk about some other stuff, so I want to eventually get to that. But the point you just made, I think, is part of the fun for me, which is that in college athletics, you saw this last night, Georgia, to force extra innings, makes a play, on and out at first base. It's like in the 99th percentile athletically. There's only a small portion of humans anywhere that could pull that off athletically, and sometimes that's what the sport provides you. But in the very next inning, on a relatively routine bunt play, the tech dude just throws it into the stands. professional sports like Major League Baseball sometimes almost too pretty. It's like the guys are too good and everything looks very, very, the sort of similar, the same, because everyone just plays the game so perfectly. In college sports, you may see the greatest athletic feat you've ever seen in your entire life, or you may see something that sort of defies explanation because of how, like, boneheaded it is. It's like college sports provides the full gamut of at least the opportunity of that in every moment, and obviously baseball is a perfect example of that.
I totally agree. I mean, high school, there's a mismatch in talent on a lot of, whether it's Friday nights or weekends, depending on the sport. And you can see some dominance. And then in professional sports, you see just consistency. So if you have that one outlier, you're going, wow, what happened? But in college, you have a mix of the two, of some truly superior performances, but it may not come as consistently as what we find in professional sports. So like you say, one play that you just go, man, that's a thing of beauty. It can't be done any better. And in the next breath, you're going, what just happened? And that's what makes it so fun. I think that's why people, it resonates. I especially here in the South, college has always been king. And I don't think that's changed. And even with the changing landscape of college athletics, I think there's an appreciation for this period of time in an athlete's journey, if you will. And sometimes it's the end, and sometimes it's just a bridge to professional sports. But man, is it fun to watch for all of us as you see, so some of the development that occurs, but really it's still kids out there playing a game that we have a love for and an appreciation for the skills at which they possess.
All right, so since you and I last spoke, you've concluded the UGA Athletic Board meetings. This is obviously kind of an important time that kind of takes place, around this year every summer. So if you can, did we lose John or we just lose his? We may have lost John. Also, I'll tap dance here and see. But if you can give us an update on kind of where things stand, kind of post-athletic board meeting and some of the big takeaways from you after getting together and talking about some of the big picture topics as it relates to Georgia here right now.
Yeah, and I think here's the thing is a couple of shoes are about to drop, and they are significant and seismic in how it's going to affect the landscape of college athletics, but they aren't the last shoes to drop. I think there are still more decisions that are going to impact what this game looks like across the board, and not just for football, but for all sports. I think when you start talking about some of the terms in which we've heard, which is, quote unquote, a revenue share type model with $20 million going to student athletes, and they haven't really fleshed that out. Talked about scholarship caps or roster caps as compared to scholarship caps. I think there's just a lot of new change that's going to take place across college athletics. And I will say this, I think Georgia is better situated than almost anyone out there. I can't think of anyone that I would rather trade with. One, financially. Two, the amount of support that the fan base has had. And three, where we are across the board with our programs. And it's going to be different. And there's going to be a lot of fans that don't like it. And, that already exists, but it does provide for unique opportunities for, 18, 19, 20-year-olds that are in this period of life that now they can kind of tap into some of the resources that you've seen float around them, but not been able to access for them. And it's going to be a different world. But I think what we just talked about, that still holds true of being able to enjoy and watch folks represent our school in a great way.
This may not be an easy question to answer, but did you detect any kind of difference in mood with the people at the athletic board meeting because of, whether it be aftermath of the House NCAA settlement or just the natural pressure that comes from a near-term future that people don't quite know what it's going to be? Did that create any kind of level of, man, things are just not as fun as they were when we were talking about back-to-back national champions? Did you detect any of that in these board meetings here going back a few days ago?
I detect that in almost every conversation I have with college athletics of, the question was raised in that meeting that Connor stiff-armed me. Let me throw that out there. I said, hey,
wow.
to Connor as he was walking to his section, and he just kept walking. So, hey, Connor,
Wow.
how about next time just some sort of acknowledgement that we know each other would have been nice.
Good for you for calling him out. Good for you for calling him out. Absolutely. That's the right decision.
Well,
right
sadly,
there.
he doesn't have a microphone in front of him right now, so he can respond. But maybe he didn't hear me. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But there's trepidation there, and in every conversation I have, when you start looking at roster caps, and you're going, well, let's look back at the short term of Georgia football, and I think we can think of a couple of walk-ons that may not have had the opportunities that existed just a few years ago under this new model, and say, man, that for the quote unquote average player, for those players that have to continue to work towards the opportunities that they possess, Stetson and Charlie are two in two different sports that came in the hard way, and this new model may not provide for those types of opportunities, and that's heartbreaking. And we're still in this world of trying to mesh what has been almost a socialist approach of we're going to pool our resources and provide opportunities for 550 scholar athletes at the University of Georgia. And now that model is going to change, and it's going to shift where some are going to be able to reap the benefits financially from these opportunities, but it's going to come at the cost of the overall offerings are going to be limited, and it may not be 500. It will not be 550 at the University of Georgia. It will be less.
Yeah.
And that's a challenging proposition. Now, for those that are able to tap into it, I get it, and you can appreciate it. But we're still in this weird world of some versions of what we're offering is capitalist and some is socialist, and those don't always marry well.
Let me also ask this, and I've tried my best to read up on all this, and I tell you, I am so confused by this, and maybe everybody is. What's about to happen to NIL? We know that players are about to get paid, and they're going to get paid through regular revenue sharing. But when it comes to NIL, this is the part I can't figure out. Is the Classic City Collective going to still exist? Is Georgia going to bring that in-house? Obviously, a lot of other programs kind of considering the same thing. It certainly seems like there'll still be a place for like regular endorsements, the same way that professional athletes get that in addition to their regular pay. Did we hear much at the athletic board meeting about what the future of NIL is going to be? We know it's going to exist, but in terms of how it's going to be administered, did that topic come up at all?
Oh, it came up. They just don't have answers yet. And, the House agreement that's been agreed to from both sides, that doesn't address all the issues. And none of what has been agreed upon addresses NIL and third party. They think it will have an impact on it. They think there is some implications and some structure that will exist that hasn't prior that might clear up some of that landscape. But none of the decisions that are made, none of the agreements that have taken place substantially address the NIL confusion that exists of, are any of these numbers real? Is there a competitive balance that exists? Is there a way to make sure that there are quote unquote legitimate NIL deals and not just payment for play, which, how thin is that gray line? But the reason why there's still confusion is because it hasn't been addressed. I don't think that they have an answer yet. There's been discussions of having a clearinghouse to making sure that all the NIL deals are what they say they are, and that would allow for some competitive balance. So what some schools are able to pay and what those deals look like, and making sure that the players are owning up on their end of whatever arrangement they have agreed to. That has not been decided yet. And so the reason why there's still confusion is because it hasn't been addressed.
I think it's fascinating. And, John, there's so much more we could talk about. Obviously, the NCAA spring meetings this past week, too. I'm sure there'll be plenty more to kind of come out of that. But all that sort of, in a lot of ways, just sort of rhymes with what we're already discussing there as well. So I'm going to let you enjoy Savannah. I'm certainly glad to have you down there with the GIAA folks, good people, obviously getting ready for their big athletic year here coming up. So, John, thanks for your time here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Certainly appreciate all of that. We'll look forward to having you back here on the program again very soon, too. And it's good to talk to you for the first time here in a couple of weeks for us here. So fun to have you back on the show there as well.
Always a good time, BA. Go Dogs, and hope our baseball team whips up on the Wolf Pack. So can't wait to watch it.
I like it, John. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Go Dogs.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I guess we'll call Georgia NC State. Is this the Dick Sheridan Bowl? Sheridan, of course, the former NC State coach, and almost became Georgia coach in the post-Vince Dooley era. So maybe we'll go back and revisit that at some point in time. So that's the first tie that comes to my mind. I'm thinking about Georgia and NC State. I guess they do also have a home in football that's at least on the schedule here coming up in future years there too. So, and of course, there's also the thing, and I know that Cody and Mike were talking about this last night on video. The last time that Georgia advanced the College World Series, it did so by beating NC State. So that is obviously a lot of fun there as well. Now, speaking of fun, here's what else is fun. It's cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And we are only a few weeks away from the debut of the newest Royal Caribbean cruise ship. I'm talking about Utopia of the Seas. And, man, what an experience that's going to be. And obviously, I'm very, very lucky. I feel that way. Very blessed to know that I'm going to be among the first to get a chance to go and see what Utopia of the Seas is all about and come back and talk to you about what kind of experience you can have on board this newest Oasis-class ship sailing from Port Canaveral. Now, the reason why I like this is because one of the things we've seen from Royal Caribbean, and this has kind of always been true, but it's almost like they've redoubled their efforts in this respect in the last couple of years, is to say, no better family vacation option than a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. For a lot of families, especially here in the Atlanta area, they kind of consider Port Canaveral the easiest port to get to. It's just right past Orlando. And for a lot of families, it's the 3 and the 4 night sailings that are just, great experience. Busy schedules, things like that. So the long weekend or kind of the 4 night deal is just a good option for getting away. And you get the best that Royal Caribbean has to offer, the newest Oasis class ship out of Port Canaveral, very convenient port for a lot of us, and on the schedule that's also very convenient there as well. So that's what Utopia of the Seas is all about. So Jessica Slater's a great travel agent. She can help you out with all that. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. You can hear all about the excitement around the newest Oasis-class ship, Utopia of the Seas, and Jessica can help you get booked up for your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation there as well. All right, let's talk about the SEC baseball schedule for today. There are still 4 super regional spots to be had here, and 2 of those games today do involve SEC teams. Game of the day overall may be LSU at North Carolina. That should be a lot of fun. But you've also got Oklahoma State and Florida. Florida won last night to preserve the chance to play here on Monday. So you got traditional power Oklahoma State and Florida battling for a super regional spot. You got LSU and North Carolina battling for a spot there as well. UNC did beat LSU on Saturday night. You've also got, I guess, Evansville and East Carolina there in Greenville looking for a spot in a super regional, and UConn and Oklahoma there as well. So still 4 spots in super regionals to be had, and 2 of those games today do involve SEC teams. So that should be a lot of fun if you want to keep your eye on all of that. Also, we talked to Jon Stinchcomb a moment ago about the Georgia Athletic Board meetings. Also, since you and I last spoke here together in a live show, we've had the SEC spring meetings there too. And I think one of my big takeaways on the SEC spring meetings at the moment is it just sort of feels like, and this is not an SEC thing, it's across college sports, it sort of feels like we've been kind of in a wait-and-see mode for college athletics for a really, really long time. For a while, some of that was, related to kind of conference realignment, things like that, playoff changes, and now there's this whole other sort of category of change when it comes to revenue and how athletes are going to be compensated. And you just kind of wonder, when will college athletics get to sort of feel like it's got a permanent system in place? It's been several years now where we haven't really had that. You're kind of left to wonder, well, when will it kind of be that way again? For instance, one of the topics now that's essentially, I mean, this was the hot topic for a couple of years, and it's not even seemingly a part of the discussion at all anymore, and that's SEC scheduling. You know, what the SEC was supposed to be able to provide you was a chance to, you know, maybe have a 9-game schedule and have, you know, the 3 permanent opponents and then the rotating, you know, games other than that, so you could go to every spot every 4 years. And it seems like now the appetite for the 9-game schedule on many in the SEC just doesn't really exist because they cannot get more money from ESPN on this. I'll be honest, and if you're watching a video, you see Greg Sankey there. I think this is one of many examples lately where I don't know that Sankey's provided great leadership for the SEC. I just don't. I think that the whole addition of Texas and Oklahoma is a little bit like the dog chasing the car. Like, if the dog did catch the car, what would he do with it? I think that the SEC caught Texas and Oklahoma and has struggled in the aftermath of that to sort of figure out what they want to do with them. Because, you know, if you want to judge this on the basis of revenue, you know, right now, Texas and Oklahoma has not necessarily made the SEC a ton more money by bringing them in. I think that Greg Sankey could have handled his negotiations with ESPN a little bit better than he did. And as it stands now, you're going to add 2 more teams to the league. The league's going to get bigger, and yet the effect of that's going to be maybe not seeing Georgia and Auburn on a yearly basis anymore. Maybe not seeing Tennessee, Alabama on a yearly basis anymore. Maybe not seeing Texas A&M on a yearly basis. There's a lot of rivalry games in this league that may not be played as frequently as they possibly should be because right now there's no agreement to get to the 9-game conference schedule. It certainly appears that's the case. Another one of the hot topics here right now that also came up this past week is kind of what the future of roster limits are going to look like in a sort of a player compensation world. As I've told you before, and I've been a broken record on this, that as college sports becomes more professionalized, it is going to look more like professional leagues. Professional leagues have fewer teams, and those teams have fewer players. And eventually that is where college athletics is going. There may not be only 32 of them the way there are in the NFL when it comes to the sport of football, but there's not going to be 133 of them. You can certainly count yourself on that. And, you know, what has been a roster limit of 120 players, things like that, obviously it just stands to reason there will be fewer players because if you've got to pay them, you're going to want to pay as few of them as possible. You know, the sort of, you know, kind of nice to have luxury of somebody who kind of helps you out at practice, things like that. Most programs are not going to want to pay those players. Georgia would because it's got the money to do it. But there's a certain uniformity that's going to take over here. And obviously you heard Kalen DeBoer, a little bit from Kirby Smart, although he sort of said he didn't really know what the true story was in all this. But you heard a lot of coaches being very outspoken about their belief that the sort of roster limit caps that are being talked about right now would be harmful to many players, and I believe they're right about that. In fact, I've said this before. The one thing we never know about all these changes that are coming to college athletics supposedly to benefit the players, what we never really hear from a lot are like the actual players on this topic. You know, John mentioned this before, but the idea that the current state of college athletics, sort of a financial standpoint, does not really look like the free market. But as I've said before, it may not be the free market, but it is the free choice. Players of their own volition choosing to be a part of whatever their sport is. And the best that I can tell, they seem to be enjoying it. And if you gave players, I'm talking about all of them, the chance to vote with full knowledge of what's coming next, would they vote for it? You know, are they happy about what's coming if a few of them get paid more, but there are fewer of them overall? I have to wonder about that. And that's some of the stuff that came up last week at the SEC spring meetings. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. All right, a couple notes to make you aware of here. First of all, here's this. As I told you about while I was gone and kind of told you about before I left, we are in the midst of a really fun giveaway right now here at DawgNation and on DawgNation Daily, along with our friends at ATL Sport Trips. You know, we got a big series of DawgNation Invasion events coming up here this fall. Excited about a great tailgate to kick off the season for Georgia and Clemson. Obviously going to Tuscaloosa in September. And the perhaps biggest of them all going to be that trip to Texas in October. And I tell you, it's one of the most talked about Georgia games of all time. And ongoing right now, your chance to win your way into the stadium there that day, courtesy of DawgNation and our friends at Atlanta Sports Trip. So I want you to go to the website, DawgNation.com/tailgate. You can get registered up there for that. Your chance to win, DawgNation.com/tailgate. You're going to get a 2-night hotel stay there in Austin, tickets to the game there as well, plus a couple of passes to our Friday night football party the day before the game, and, of course, the DawgNation Invasion tailgate there on Saturday, and you know how fun all of those are there as well. So the deadline on this is coming up. It's June 5th. It's 11:59 p.m. there on – get very specific here for fun. 11:59 p.m. there on June 5th. So by the end of the night, they're on June 5th. Get in there on that, DawgNation.com/tailgate. That's how you register for your chance to win. Hope you can be with us there for the DawgNation Invasion event in Austin, Texas, powered by our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips. And, of course, if DawgNation's there, you know there's going to be plenty of Finnish long drink flowing. And Finnish long drink, a great thing for you to make sure you're enjoying, to make your summer experience as good as it can possibly be. It's pool season. It's lake season. Everybody's hanging out outside right now. And, of course, enjoying the Finnish long drink, whether it's the long drink cranberry, long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume, long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar. After a week away from work, I could probably use as much of that as I can possibly get. Or the traditional in the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick, probably still my favorite after all these years. It's the Finnish long drink. Make sure you find some wherever you're doing your beverage shopping here. You can go online, thelongdrink.com. You can put in your zip code and find out where you can pick some up. You can also hear about the store. You know, it kind of comes in a can, so some people think it's a beer, but it's not. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail. It's a really fun category of beverage. A lot of celebrity investors, Ricky Fowler from the PGA Tour, Miles Teller, you can know all about all these guys. They tried it, they loved it, and they wanted to help kind of spread the message about it. It's been in America now for a few years, been in Georgia now for a few years too. So wherever you're going, you're going to be able to find some online, the Finnish long drink. You can find it at thelongdrink.com. So obviously we got a lot of good golden shoes to give in the days to come. A lot of folks sharing some fun stuff with me while I was gone. I want to start with this one. Obviously we like celebrating good news around here. Billy Ray sent this to me. Talking about UGA weddings of the day. He says, speaking of UGA weddings, my son was married last weekend on campus at the chapel. The couple, both UGA grads, rang the chapel bell, headed to the Georgia Theater for their reception, and served the groom's cake. Go Dogs. Now, if you're listening podcast, you can't see this, but the groom's cake is awesome. It's a tremendous rendition of San Presume. That's cool. And how about this for Carson and Chandler? A beautiful picture of them in front of the Georgia Theater with their name there on the marquee. What? That is an amazing, amazing photo. That's an all-time great there. And anybody who loves Athens would love the Georgia Theater. And what a great place to have your wedding reception. That seems like an all-time great Georgia-themed wedding. So congratulations to Billy Ray and his son. Great wedding ceremony there. That's wonderful to see, and a well-earned golden shoe there on that. Lousy, stinking Gators. How about a long time for them? 1,304 days. That's how long it's been since they've beaten Georgia in football. And, boy, we love that number. We love the Gator Hater Updater. And it's great to be back with you. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. And it's great to be back with you. Fun stuff. We're going to talk to you here about everything going on around UGA athletics and everything else. So good stuff. Let's take your comments. I'm going to go to YouTube here first for a moment and see how they're doing today and see what's on everybody's mind. Frank Patterson says, do we see the video of the Army players calling the dogs out there at Kudzu Hill? Yeah, I did see that. I'm guessing we may show that eventually. That was really fun. Just a great weekend for Georgia, just for college baseball in general, but for Georgia baseball in particular, a really great thing. Oh, yeah, Jonathan Ayer. Somebody mentioned this earlier in our First and 15. Jonathan Ayer also bringing it up there as well, that Baby Gronk is now a Georgia commit. And as I joke with our First and 15 audience, if you don't know the Baby Gronk story, just be glad that you don't. Be thankful that has not kind of made its way into your field of vision. But I did see that. I did see the Baby Gronk news. I did see that. And no, I was not on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation last week. I wish that was. Listen, any week that includes a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation for me is a great one. If I was, I'd be happy to tell you about it. But last week we were just sort of away from work. Sometimes we just Foster Moss saying the same thing. We do have Utopia coming up before the summer's done, but sometimes it's just kind of nice to get away from work and kind of unplug with the family. And sometimes, that you sort of need that space to be able to do that. So yeah, that was really, really good. We have a very weird summer. I will tell you more about this as we kind of get into it. We do have a very weird summer coming up. Very different summer for me. My son has a big event taking place this summer that's important to him, and it's going to just cause us to have a little bit of a different schedule than we normally have around here. So I'll tell you more about that here coming up. But just be on guard for, especially as we get into kind of like late July, kind of right before the start of fall camp. It's going to get pretty weird around here for a little while. Foster Moss says it's how to take swimming lessons with the kids, which is very funny. Frank Patterson also mentioned Corey Phelps in the home run, kind of doing his best. Was it Elijah Moore who did the celebration in the Egg Bowl? Yeah, that definitely came to mind for me on that. It certainly did. D-Mart42 also shouting out Knox Bennett, now a Georgia baseball transfer, which is kind of fun. Let's see what else. G. Grayson, the subject of the Georgia pitching. Yeah, I mean, I said this during the show. Georgia walks a lot of batters, and that's why. Yeah, I wasn't quite so sure what the postseason fate for this team was going to be because of that. But you can't deny last night, in some high leverage situations with kind of back end young guys, Georgia got out of that. And sometimes you grow up, and sometimes you grow up fast. And Georgia's ability to score runs keeps them in games. So, I felt like you had that series of back-to-back series, the sweep against South Carolina, and obviously they got knocked out. The sweep against Vanderbilt, and I guess they got knocked out too. But nonetheless, that those were the two series where in kind of back-to-back weekends, Georgia sort of announced itself. And ultimately they probably just played a little bit above their head for those 6 days. But what they did in this regional, because close game against Army, close game last night against Tech, but you're still going 3-0. I mean, that's still a march through the regional, making it look much easier than some SEC teams were able to do. I think that Georgia proved something in terms of how it handled the regional, because those of us who've been around for a while will tell you it has not always looked that easy in this round, for Georgia, but it certainly did this weekend, which is nice. Let's see what else. DMart42 says, anybody ever had a number one in baseball, basketball, and football before? Obviously, that's what Georgia's got a chance to do here. They've had, the number one pick in football a couple times. Ant-Man, number one pick there in basketball, and obviously Charlie Connon's going to have a chance to be 1-1 in baseball here coming up too. Let's see what else. Yeah, a lot of good baseball talk here in the comment section here today. Let's see what else. Jay Shipe says, if I spend as much time studying for a helicopter license as I did cruising, he'd be flying to work now. I don't know that I got the guts to fly a helicopter. I don't know that I've got that. Frank Patterson also kind of pointing out that Stetson Bennett's been back working with the Rams again, which you love to see. Very happy for him there on that. And, just, kind of wish him well. What I'm assuming is probably a pretty long journey for him. So I definitely wish him well on all of that for sure. No doubt about that. Randy Payne, speaking of Dog Nation Cruises, Randy Payne checking in. You love to see that. Let me go to Facebook for a moment. On Facebook. Let's check in over here with folks for a few minutes. See how they're doing. Tennille Calvino, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. William Camacho loves seeing the Diamond Dawgs. They're playing well at home. Exciting. Ryan Walker, I would love to be on your show. I would love to be on your show. You've emailed me before. Hit me up on email, and we'll see if we can make that happen. Listen, if I get a chance to follow the great Buck Bellew, I'm happy about that. I'm happy about that. Keith Folds says he's watching but can't listen. He's in a public office. Anything important I've missed? Well, listen, we're just glad to have you here in some form or fashion. Kent Holcomb says, go Georgia baseball. Yeah, it's been fun, right, Kent? Glad to see you, too, by the way. Hope you're feeling good. But it's been a fun experience. You know that about that. Gary Holt, good to see you. So Jamie Huff says that, is it Baby Gronk's already switched his commitment now to Florida, too? Somebody had mentioned that he had – I saw him commit to Georgia, then somebody had mentioned that he kind of flipped away from Georgia. So, listen, that's the kind of recruiting win that Florida probably have to celebrate because they don't have very much else to celebrate. Johnny Prescott on the subject of Michigan. I would say of all the teams that you're going to kind of see up near that sort of top 15 preseason, the one I could see perhaps falling, apart and not having anywhere near as successful a season, especially as a follow-up to a national championship, for me, Michigan might be that team. Michigan might be that team for me. I think that might be a case. How about Susan Kornbluth checking in on a cruise in Croatia? Susan, that's awesome. What a great trip that is. And thank you for the kind words. And thanks for joining us as you're sailing there in the open seas. That's really fun, Susan. Have a great time. And thank you very much for being here with us today. David West says, as he calls them, the game chickens have fired their head baseball coach. Yeah, pretty disappointing season for South Carolina. This is a team that's, in this century won a couple of national championships. And they were in a super regional a year ago, is that right? And they lose, kind of pretty ugly fashion in their NCAA regional here right now. So, that's a program that's going to put a lot of pressure on itself for baseball, big ballpark, things like that. And, so perhaps not a surprise. Ken Holcomb says maybe Charlie Connick can jump to the Braves, give him some much-needed offensive help. Yeah, the Braves bat's been a little bit of an ugly scene here, as of late. Corey Henderson mentioning the umpire. So one of the things from last night's baseball game, one of the things that I just have loved about all of this is like, my son and I were together last night living and dying with like every one of these, pitches in this game. My son's huge baseball fan. Daughter doesn't care as much about it. Son just loves baseball. He loves playing baseball, loves watching baseball, just loves baseball. And he was telling me last night about he had this idea, and he was being so serious about this. And so I just love conversations like this with your kids. But he's like, he's trying to sell me on his idea. He's 12. He's trying to sell me on his idea for what he was calling skill-based pay for umpires. He wants to pay umpires on the basis of their skills. And what his point is like, listen, for the bad umpires, you just pay them less money. Eventually, you'll push all the bad umpires out of the game. The financial penalty is going to get rid of them. You can increase the quality of the umpiring by just paying the bad umpires less money, which I just thought was just a great conversation. Just, it's like, this is the stuff that when your team goes on a little bit of a run, you just have these moments with your kids, and it's just great stuff. Craig Hill watching from his cruise down the Chattahoochee River. Listen, I got no problem with that there as well. A little Alan Jackson for you on a Monday afternoon, or soon-to-be afternoon. That's good. Good stuff. Let me go to DawgNation.com here for a moment, too. Randy Hall, did I finally see The Iron Claw? I did watch that a couple of weeks ago. This is the movie about the Von Erich family, and I thought it was great. I thought it was terrific. I wasn't quite so sure what to expect from it. I couldn't believe how, wrestling friendly the movie was. Like, it really seemed to follow, because, I watched, it's a weird comparison, but I saw the first season of, the LA Lakers HBO show that basically like took a lot of like storyline liberties with like the Showtime Lakers, kind of sort of changed the story a little bit to sort of make it more interesting. And I was kind of curious, well, are they just going to like, especially like, Hollywood sort of fancy type people, sophisticated people, they don't care much about wrestling. So therefore they just sort of like trample on the wrestling storyline. And for the most part, they didn't. They had Freebirds in there. They had, Kerry beating Flair in the Texas Stadium. They even had Kevin selling World Class to Jerry Jarrett. Like, this was like a very wrestling. There's a lot of wrestling storyline in the movie. Obviously, it's tremendously sad in a lot of places. Although in some cases, for Kevin in particular, and at first I was kind of wondering why they were going to focus so much on Kevin Von Erich, but the story itself kind of makes a little bit more sense when you see the full movie. I really liked it. I thought it was really good. Kent Holcomb, by the way, agrees with my son on umpire compensation. So there you go. Randy Hall says, have I gotten my Lindy's football magazine yet? I have not. I'll also say this. For a while, I was a little bit worried because Lindy's is on newsstands. I was also a little bit worried that Athlon wasn't going to come out this year because I wasn't seeing anything online about that, but I believe it's now also coming out there too. So eventually this week at some point in time, I'll get Lindy's, I'll get Athlon, and we'll have some fun with that. How about this? Scott Harris spent some time in Scotland, played in Muirfield while he was there. That's an amazing thing. What an amazing, amazing experience that is. Good for you, Scott. That's awesome. Dave Snow, by the way, coming back stateside and going through the UK while he's there. That's great. That's great. West GA Dog fan on Tech fan reaction to Danny Hall. Boy, Danny Hall's been there forever, right? And I mean, this is not me trying to be, snarky, but they haven't won very much, right? I mean, it seems like Tech's been a part of the baseball conversation a good bit and just hasn't really won very much. I don't know what that means about Danny Hall. Have not gotten out of an NCAA regional, Cody Chaffetz told me, since 2006. So, yeah, there you go. That kind of tells you a lot there. And they've obviously had some good players. I'll tell you that. I know the Burris kid from Houston County, man, he's a player. Oh, boy, is he a player. And I know, Georgia got the big strikeout on him late last night, but man, what a player he is. I guess some of the Georgia fans were also Georgia students were chanting transfer to him at one point in time. He's a good player. We saw him play in high school last year. Was very impressed with him, and he's a good player. So DT says that LSU has done the three for with Shaq, Paul Skeens, who went 1-1 last year in the Major League draft, and then obviously Javaris Russell, the quarterback, who went to the Raiders. So there you go. And I guess Joe Burrow would have done that too. So there you go on that. All right. A couple more comments. Back on YouTube for a moment. Jay Shipe says, with Kirby and Kiffin having the best teams in the SEC, will Bama fans be delegated to only bragging about 18 titles in Saban's coaching tree moving forward? Yeah, you may see a lot of Bama fans become historians here pretty quick. Yeah, they may be relegated to historian status here pretty quick. Frank Patterson says, did you see the clip of Najee Harris talking trash to Dejon Edwards? Somebody sent that to me, and I need to make sure I see this. They kind of went back and forth with each other a little bit, which is really funny. Really funny. Jonathan Aaron says, I know your son hated Angel Hernandez retiring. Yeah, that was kind of a big deal in our house. Like the one thing, like when you're a 12-year-old kid and you love baseball, like you stay mad at umpires all the time, whether it be in your own game or the games you're watching on TV, just constantly mad at umpires. And we try to, obviously explain they're doing the best they can, and every single judgment call is a good call to somebody and a bad call to somebody else. But constantly staying mad at umpires in our house. Let's see what else. Paul Moon about A.J. Hill. I think Hill's a really good player. Hill was a very good freshman quarterback. Houston County was a pretty good team his freshman year, and Hill was putting up pretty good numbers. So he's been a good player. It's obviously a very, a very strong offensive program. I think Hill's a good player. I don't quite know what his college fit necessarily is, but he's a very good player. And to be as good as he was, as young as he was, is also a pretty big statement. G. Gray says Boston, Dallas for the NBA title. Who's going to win it all? I don't know. I'm sort of like generally predisposed to root against Boston in these situations, so I guess I go with Luka. I feel like with Luka making the final, we can't do the Luka versus Trey debate anymore. I just feel like it's over. Trey Young's next move is to probably ask for a trade. Luka Doncic is in the NBA Finals. Even if he doesn't win, I just sort of feel like the Luka versus Trey debate is over. It may have been over before this anyway, but to me, it's over. Luka's the clear winner here. And, should Atlanta have known that on the forefront? I don't really know. But, certain players will just always be compared to each other. In the case of Luka and Trey, that was always going to be true. And in this particular case, Luka Doncic is the runaway winner on that. Also, the subject of, somebody mentioned A.J. Hill perhaps going to Memphis, and Nature Gator mentioning the fact that they got FedEx money. And, what I think is kind of cool is that, people kind of panic about the state of NIL, but I do believe that if people would have just kind of left NIL alone, eventually it would have kind of stabilized a little bit more. I do think that's the case. And in the case of, say, FedEx is an example of that, is that FedEx is starting to show a little bit of willingness to want to spend some money to support the Memphis program. FedEx is a big corporate citizen there in Memphis. Obviously, Memphis is the local program. It would not surprise me at all if, a company like FedEx be willing to spend some money to get a guy like A.J. Hill. Like, the one thing you are seeing for some Group of Five programs is, for instance, say, Michael Pratt. He didn't transfer from Tulane. It seems like Tulane was able to hold on to him. There are other examples of that in the Group of Five. Now, some of this is also academic related sometimes, but, Group of Five teams have been able to hold on to quarterback. So, Memphis does not have, I'm sure, big NIL budget, but getting a chance to get a quarterback, decent prospect, I could see that happening based on some of the other stuff that's out there. Let's see what else. Excuse me. A couple more comments. We're going to go. Anything else on Facebook here? Jacob O'Neill on the subject of the Trey versus Luka comparison. Say, come on, it's Atlanta. They always messing something up. Yeah. It seems like we have a lot of that. Jamie Huff says, he says, I knew you were going to go with Luka. He says, if Trey had Kyrie. Yeah, but obviously, listen, I've watched 10 minutes of NBA all year long. So, whatever I'm saying about the NBA is worth 5 cents at best. But, so my understanding is Kyrie's obviously made a huge impact on Dallas, no doubt about that. But Luka's also been a really good player even before Kyrie arrived there. And, I don't want to turn this into a Hawks thing. How many coaches is Trey Young going to get fired before he finally takes some responsibility for his own game? At a certain point in time, don't we have to ask that question? He's gotten half dozen coaches fired, and it's just not happening. It's just not happening. So at a certain point in time, I feel like Trey is going to take some personal responsibility for what Atlanta isn't. But like I said, who knows? I'm sure you're probably right. Susan Kornblut says her brother-in-law Phil was covering games for his sports talk show in Columbia. That baseball coach in South Carolina should have been fired last year. So there you go. Yeah, obviously South Carolina fans have a little bit of I kind of mentioned this earlier that you kind of get out of kind of like the pro sports bubble a little bit, and college baseball becomes a pretty big deal. In a place like South Carolina, because they've had national championship success, they're obviously they want more of that, and so at a place like South Carolina, you got to win. There's no doubt about that. Steve Walton says, does Georgia wear blackout jerseys against Tech? Yeah, I'd like to see it. I mean, I guess night game. This is probably the biggest thing that I probably had a reaction to while I was gone. The fact that game's going to be on Black Friday. Black jerseys on Black Friday seems to make some sense to me. I'd be okay with that. Late in the season, night game seems to make some sense. Jamie Huff says, didn't Rick Carlisle walk away from Dallas because of Luke? Honestly, I don't. I don't know the answer to that. But I mean, one guy's in the NBA final, one guy's not. And that to me is probably as simple as it needs to be. Let's see what else. Anything else before we go? Let's try DawgNation.com. Steve Edwards says, okay, he said he's having a little bit of an issue with, is this the podcast? Steve, I'll look into that and see. That would certainly be bad news. I'll look into that and see. Yeah, let me see if I can figure that out. Thank you, Steve. I'll check into that. Hit me up on email, too, if you don't mind, and I'll see if I can figure that out. And I'm assuming it's probably Apple because it's always Apple. Spotify works as smoothly as can be. Apple's always an issue, so I'll check and see there on that. All right, good stuff. Yeah, Shane Holiday mentioned in Burris, the kid from Houston County that's attacked, man. Yeah, really good player, and not the biggest dude, and that probably hurt him from a draft standpoint, but really good. All right, we are going to go. Y'all check out RS Andrews online at rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price promise. You can trust them on all of that, including hot weather season, air conditioning units. Get them tuned back up to factory fresh specs. RS Andrews, all about that. Find them online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. Check them out today. To get you tuned up. And, of course, we're happy to have them as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down each and every day. Y'all have a great day. Back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Seems great to be saying that. Feels good to be back live again. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.